Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Brett. In this video, I'm going to be talking about 8 books that I've read that completely changed me as a reader. And these aren't necessarily my top books of all time, although all of the books that I chose, I had a good experience reading. The first book I want to talk about is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. This is a book that is about the humanity inside of people. It's about what do we do whenever everything around us is darkness and we just want to live a good life still. So this book opens up with a team of researchers who are somewhere like the Arctic, and they're digging through the ice, and they come across a presumably prehistoric little girl. And unfortunately, this body happens to have an active virus in it. This virus somehow gets back to the rest of the world and completely runs rampant. So this is a contemporary science fiction that ended up being more relevant than the author intended it to be, because it was, to my knowledge, it was written before the pandemic even started. This story is told in short story format. So you follow a bunch of different people, maybe like 7 or 8 different settings, and their experiences with just total chaos and death happening around them. It is told in a longer narrative format. Details and things, they loop back on each other, and it is a cohesive story. It works really, really well for this because you're getting a bunch of different perspectives, and it gives the author an opportunity to talk about some, maybe it's not appropriate to say cool ideas, cool science fiction ideas, but some of the settings and some of the technology and things that appear in this book are cool despite the main theme of darkness and bleakness. You know, there's different ways of telling stories, and you can fall in love and really, really enjoy those. The next book I want to talk about is The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw. Now, this book is a little bit more of like a weird fantasy horror, body horror book. It's not super gross. It's actually pretty tasteful, if you can use that word here, but you know, there's blood, there's gore, there's some weird things happening in this book, but ultimately, the way that this book changed me is it helped me realize that I really enjoy weird fantasy, grim, dark sort of thing. I'm really into. So, The Salt Grows Heavy. You follow the perspective of a mermaid, or a siren more like. She's not very pleasing to the eye. She's got these super sharp teeth, and the story opens up with her and a plague doctor standing outside of a burning down kingdom. It was the kingdom that she once belonged to, and her husband, he cut off her tongue, as typically happens in these mermaid stories, you know. He cut off her tongue and she couldn't speak, and I don't know if it was in retaliation or if she even had anything to do with it, but this kingdom is burning and she doesn't really care. So her and her friend or co-conspirator or whatever, you don't really know at first, go into the wilderness, and it's their story trying to find a place to go. Grim, dark, weird fantasy. I'm into it. So, next book we have Upgrade by Blake Crouch. The note about this book here is science fiction. It is hard science fiction. The theme of this book is DNA manipulation and upgrading, as the title suggests. The science fiction is really, really cool. You follow along with this guy who ends up with DNA manipulation happening within his body. And he's tied into where this technology comes from, and it ends up being a little bit of a thriller. You get some action scenes. You're following the mystery of why this is happening and what he's going to do about it. So he becomes somewhat of a superhuman. He's got this crazy mind, and his DNA continues to upgrade and be manipulated as the story goes on. And the other note I have here is action scenes. I thought that this book had great action scenes, which is not something I was typically prone to reading. His mind basically becomes a supercomputer, and he's able to like subdivide his attention. So like, you know, if you were able to focus on 2 things at once, you know, but instead he can do 10 things at once, but he can focus on all 10 of them all at the same time and do it perfectly, basically, because of this DNA upgrade. And because of that time, he can like sort of process things so fast that it feels like time has slowed down for him. And there's a couple of scenes where that mechanic is utilized, and it was really, really cool to me. How this book changed me is it made me open a little bit more to really hard sci-fi, because I think it delves into the real genes and real DNA strands that are manipulated, and how somebody might go about that. You know, like, it is science fiction, but it's hard. It's probably deeply researched, and it's well written. So it's a thick, dense read, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. So there we go. Next up, we have The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This book is one of the first books that I read that I questioned halfway throughout. Am I really enjoying this? And by the end of the book, I answered that question with a firm yes. The Glass Hotel is about two half-siblings who start in one place and drift apart. In my opinion, this book, you know, a lot of people called it directionless. You don't really have this like firm plot, and you're getting a bunch of different perspectives on different situations that happen. But none of it is all that exciting. And I think that's one of the reasons why halfway through it, I said, am I really enjoying this? I think it's a lot of the reason that people say I didn't like this book. However, in my opinion, there was a very hard set theme, and I will say that I loved it. Emily St. John Mandel, in my eyes, is a bit of an experimental author. She toys with conventional storytelling tropes and ideas. She kind of twists them at her will. She respects you as a reader, and she lets you make your own conclusions. This book was about delusion, and either the denial or acceptance of delusion, and how that affects your life, and how you allow it to affect your life. So what this book did for me is it taught me that slow burn thrillers that maybe make you think a little bit harder about what's going on are super enjoyable. This completely changed what I would be willing to read over the next few years after I read it. So, okay, coming in hot, we got one of the books that I actually have with us, and that is Stanislaw Lem's The Futurological Congress. This book was hilarious. So Lem is a science fiction author, and that's what this is. It is science fiction. I was legitimately laughing the entire way through this book. It's a really short book. It's less than 200 pages. It's actually less than 150 pages. This book is about a congress that is called with a bunch of scientists to talk about the future of the world, what's happening in science, and what do we need to be aware of. And somehow, some way, these things called benignomizers go into the air. And people are basically hallucinating. But at one point, our main character snaps out of his hallucination and ends up trying to convince people to stop fighting or otherwise, because this big hallucination brought out a ginormous fight. He's trying to convince me to stop fighting, and people are trying to get him to go somewhere safe, and you know, it's a big mess, and he ends up being shot. And instead of dying, somebody else there saves him and puts him on ice, puts him in a cryogenic chamber or something like that, and he ends up in a future like 130 years later. And in this future, people are taking pills and medicine for any and all experiences that they want to have. And some of the names for these medicine, the names of them are absolutely hilarious. It's a major, you know, warning call for, you know, at the time medicine was becoming this, you know, it's not necessarily just for pain. You can be taking medicine for anxiety or for weight loss and stuff like that. And Lem was saying, hey, we got to do something about this before it gets absolutely insane, before we have medicine that can help you watch a TV show, or medicine that will make you think that you went to the restaurant and you enjoyed a four-course meal when you really didn't. But it was hilarious. It was great. And so how this book changed me? Satire. I want to read more satire. I want to laugh out loud whenever I'm reading a book. And that was awesome to me. So very cool. Next up. Okay. I know Book Talk already did this book. I'm sorry. Not sorry. This is how you lose the time war. I'm not going to say very much about it because I know that this book is divisive, but this book was just absolutely incredible. I'll give a very, very brief idea of the plot. You have two characters who are on two opposite ends of a war that spans throughout time and space. The war is basically infinite. It's the time war. And these two characters, they are battling it out. And when one person does something to sabotage the other person is there to say, not so fast. I actually sabotaged you. And now you have to, try to correct this across time and space. They're writing letters to each other. One person might use some sort of weird science magical thing to imprint a letter within the rings of a tree. And the other person might receive that, and then 50 years later, they might, put a letter within the movement of ants under a rock by a river. So it's science fiction, but it's really science fantasy. Anyway, it's a love story. It's really beautiful. It's really poetic. How this changed me as a reader is, I was saying to myself, how did they write this book? Because it's written by two people, Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. How in the world did they write this book? So I looked it up. One person would send their writing and their letter to the other author, and they would read it and write back. I don't know that they had a plot necessarily in mind. It kind of came together at the end, but yeah, they were just essentially writing these poetic letters back and forth to one another in the real world and edited it down and put it in a book. And I think that was really, really cool. So the way that this book changed me is it made me interested in the way that authors write books. Let me know, please, if you do go read this book, let me know. What was the divisive point for you? What made you go, oh, this is a 5-star read, or this is a 0-star read and I hated it? Next, we have another one of my recent reads here, which is Slewfoot, A Tale of Bewitchery. So I got this book recommended to me through a video by The Book Leo. She was making a video about books that she recommends for the fall. A cozy TBR list. It's kind of a thick boy. It's only 300 pages in this book, but it's a big book. It's like the dimensions of a textbook. But one of the reasons that is because it has some pictures in it. There's like 8 or 9 pictures in here, and that's some of the characters there. They're like little creatures who are advisors to this devil character. Slewfoot is about a woman who gets sold into a marriage with a man who lives in a Puritan society. And they live on this farm. The farm is like co-owned by her brother-in-law. The husband dies in a tragedy, and she's the sole inhabitant of this farm. But the brother-in-law wants to take back ownership of it. She is put into an impossible situation where she has to pay off the debts of this farm to live on it, or she is going to get kicked off her farm and essentially kicked out of this society. She ends up making a deal with this devil-like creature called Slewfoot who lives in the woods of the surrounding area. They call him the Slayer. He's like a bloodthirsty animal, terrible creature. He's got these like weird animal advisor people that have the face of little baby children who talk to him, and they're super creepy, and they're trying to convince him to kill people, and he doesn't want to kill people. And so this unlikely pair comes together and forms a team, and yeah, it's just this story about what lengths you're willing to go to discover yourself and really prove yourself as a person worthy of a life, and what that means to you. It's a very cozy read, although the themes are kind of heavy at times. You have just a bunch of different things happening, and I thought it was awesome. The way that this book changed me is it opened me up to what I would call this kind of cozy cottage core fantasy. I want to mention here that much like The Glass Hotel, this is a book that helped me realize character-driven books can be just as fun as plot-driven books. And so yeah, that's another way this changed me. The last book I have here is a book that I read as a child. And maybe because of how long ago I read it and how young I was, maybe the most influential change. And that is Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I went down to the library in my elementary school and checked out this book. Shel Silverstein is a really interesting person. He writes these, for the sake of children's poetry, they're weird. They're weird poems. He's willing to let a child's mind roam. He's willing to show them something that's outside of the norm of society and say, what are you going to do with this? And people at the time of these books being entered into the libraries at different elementary schools and stuff, people and parents, I should say, did not want these books on the shelves. They thought that he was writing weird poems that were gonna change the minds of children for the worse. There's a great video on this on YouTube just about the storyline of why they didn't want his books and what ultimately became of that. Shel Silverstein is a G. He is just he's willing to say, no, I don't want children to be subdued by these just typical stories. I want to reach out to them and say, hey, think for yourself, and these are weird, and I want to see what you do with that. It opened me up to just not following everybody else, you know, being willing to say, you know what, I'm weird and that's okay. These have been books that that completely changed me. What did you think? Have you read any of these books? If you have, did they change you? And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do leave a subscription. I would really appreciate that. This is only the second video on my channel. I'm having a blast making them, and I hope that I can continue on talking about books with you. So, peace.